Hello, everyone. Welcome to the MakerDAO Scientific Governance and Risk Meeting number 109, taking place on Thursday, September the 10th at 1600 UTC-ish. My name is Long for Wisdom. I'm the MakerDAO Governance Facilitator at the moment. So yeah, I'm joined by, let's see, 36 currently Maker people. We've got an agenda for today. It's a little bit lighter than usual, but we've got some discussion points. So we're gonna maybe open up some conversations. So yeah, feel free to interrupt if you have something to say. Someone will let you know if it becomes a problem. So yeah, please feel free. All right, I'll just go through the agenda quickly. So we're going to have domain updates from the domains. We're going to have a MIPs update. And we're going to have the MIPs submission review. Rashesh is going to do state of the peg as usual. And the three discussion topics we got for today are, we're going to spend some time talking about ETH-B, the ETH-B vault. So pretty much just going to kind of open that discussion. We're going to have a discussion around kind of real-world assets, Centrifuge, and the domain teams and how they prioritize collateral types, because there's been some questions around that recently. And then we'll kind of discuss the continued peg deviation that we're dealing with. All right. Cool. Yeah, I guess let's start with domain updates. I guess smart contracts. Do you guys want to start?
Sure. Not so much. Just a few things changed in terms of risk parameters this week. The base rate will remain unchanged at -2%, and TBTC will be whitelisted on the BTC Oracle. And there's an ongoing signal request for increasing the USDCA debt ceiling on the forums right now. And the result of this will be included in tomorrow's executive. And in terms of just a few MIPs, I think will be discussed later, but the dark spells and formal submission, we have a proposal to onboard 4 members of the Foundation Smart Contracts, the main team, Lucas, Brian, Chris, and myself, that was submitted yesterday. And then lastly, a proposal to offboard Mariano, MIP 7C4 is in formal submission as well. And that's all. That's all I have, unless anyone else has anything else to add. There's some others like to discuss, like the holdup in collateral types. I think that we'll discuss later. So I don't have any reason to discuss that now, but that's it.
Great, thanks, Phil. Yeah, any other smart contracts guys, feel free to chime in if you want. But if not, I will move on. Cool. All right, Oracles, Nick, do you want to give us a brief update?
Yeah, kind of brief this week. So like Will already mentioned, right, we had the whitelisting proposal this week to whitelist TBTC on the ETH-BTC Oracle. You know, they were already whitelisted before, but that was on their previous deployment, right? And they had a bug, and you know they went back and fixed a bunch of stuff. So this was more of a swap than you know, swapping their old address for the new address anyway. Still kind of surprising to see that there was like one voter with like 500 MKR voting against it. Even more surprising because when I went back and checked their voting history, they voted on the first poll to whitelist them in the first place. So not quite sure what's going on there, but maybe they want to bring that up in the forum. The much more important issue is that last week we deprecated the Oracle V1 contracts. These were the ones that were used in single collateral DAI, right? And we'd shut down single collateral DAI, and we'd warned people that, you know, after a healthy amount of time after, you know, single collateral DAI got shut down, you know, we would be shutting down the oracles as well. So we gave people like 6+ months heads up and got confirmation from multiple people, right? That, hey, we've migrated off, we're fine. Other people just didn't respond for 6 months, and lo and behold, we have our first casualties. If anyone is familiar with open options, OPYN, apparently they sold put options against ETH that don't expire until June of 2021, and they have no way of changing which oracle those things are pointed to. So basically, if they can't use the Oracle V1 medianizer, they're screwed. So what they've done is they've submitted a proposal that I've kind of discussed the situation with them to figure out what the options are, and kind of what we've thought about is what if we were to whitelist the Oracle V1 on our current oracles, right? So basically, and then anyone could poke the V1 contract, right? So essentially, anyone could pay the gas cost, call the function to update the price on the V1 contract, and the V1 contract would just read from the V2 oracle. It's a little bit controversial, right? Because part of us selling oracles as a service, right, as a product offering, is based on the fact that if people want to use our data, they have to get whitelisted. Versus this kind of lets people go around that, right? If anyone can call this function, right, and this is not something we can change, right, because the contract is already the contract is what it is, and it's been deployed, and that's the one, right? It means that anyone, as long as they're willing to pay the gas costs, can just get the price anyway. So that's something that the community kind of needs to weigh. I'm more of the opinion that this is more of a PR issue, where we really don't want to be that, we really don't want to be the one to let another protocol hang out to dry. And if it's only till June anyway, we can kind of just see this as like a PR move to get more mind share anyway. Okay, and last update is so last week's executive proposal went through. So MyCrypto and Argent are officially light feeds right now that are supplying prices to the oracles. And that's it for me.
Great, thanks, Nick. That was awesome. So one thing I think you clarified with me, but it's probably worth mentioning, is that if we do whitelist the V1 oracles, we can unwhitelist it again fairly easily, right? If it does turn out to be bad, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's totally correct. So the intention would be after those options expire in June, we could then reverse the whitelisting. And in the meanwhile, we can also monitor through kind of blockchain data how many people are actually using that V1 oracle. So if we see like a big spike in usage, and we know that it's just kind of parasitic behavior from a bunch of people that just don't want to bother with getting whitelisted, then we'll know that as well, and we'll know who those people are.
I have a question. Do they need the oracle the whole time, or would it be sufficient if they just get access to the oracle for June?
They need it the whole time because those options are collateralized and can get liquidated if the price drops low enough on the underlying. It's some weird stuff. They have you can comment on they've already posted a proposal in the Oracle section on the Maker forum, so you can ask them more specifics on there.
Okay.
Awesome. All right, let's move on to risk. Primož, do you want to give a risk update?
Yeah. So this week we published 2 collateral risk evaluations. One was posted by our independent analyst Will for Link, and then we posted one for Compound, and then there was another one from last month that didn't pass for Loopring. In terms of parameters that were proposed, Will suggested to put a debt ceiling of 5 million on Link, 2% risk premium, and 175 liquidation ratio. I commented it that those parameters are quite conservative, simply because the analysis showed that Link is very, very liquid, compared to all the assets we analyzed in the past. And considering the appetite that might be there to mint the DAI, especially if we consider that one of those Y earn vaults might be actually utilizing Maker for their strategy for this Y Link vaults, we could go higher. I think it's fairly safe, but essentially it's up to the governance. Will suggested to have this more conservative approach of lower debt ceiling initially and then increasing it in due time when we monitor the demand and the behavior of vaults and see what's the risk exposure. For Compound, we set the debt ceiling to 7 million. Surprisingly, Compound is fairly liquid. Again, compared to all the other ERC20 assets we analyzed, Comp is pretty liquid. What's particularly good about it is that it reaches high liquidity on decentralized exchanges, which is great in terms of liquidations, potential ones. So the debt ceiling is 7 million, risk premium is 3%, and liquidation ratio at 175. What else? So we published one research, was made by me and Marco, for CUSDC and CDAI as potential collateral types. I suggest to read that one. It's quite interesting how much effect those collateral types would have on DAI price. We could actually achieve that instead of, the main strategy in Compound currently is for people to recycle DAI. If we enable something like CUSDC as collateral, the more interesting strategy could be that people actually re-leverage over Maker with CUSDC, and they could achieve nice yields, and meanwhile they would push the DAI price down. So it seemed kind of interesting conclusion at the end. So this is something to consider in the future. We are also focusing on new rate setting approach. The thing I wrote in the past, coming up with some solutions that should benefit governance, make it more agile and less complex, because there are some inconsistencies now when we set rates and apply risk premiums. We're also preparing a list of tasks that we believe needs to be carved in short term. So the idea here is, from my side, to have more community participation in risk-related work. And we also want to better understand, the current risk exposure and what's actually happening with the world, right? I think that part is really important when we decide about rates. We would ideally want to know what the users are doing with the DAI, right? So we'll have a better picture of all of it. So I'm going to provide some tasks, and hopefully, we'll get some people who want to, help us out and then eventually become a risk contributor, because the risk team currently is a bit understaffed. And then lastly, there were 2 polls initiated. One was at the beginning of the week. The one was for lower, so for auction parameters, to lower the box value from 30 million to 15, and potentially lower TTL, so the auction bid duration. The current vote is winning is 15 million bucks and keeping TTL unchanged. So this poll is closed tomorrow, and it should proceed to on-chain vote on Monday. And then lastly, just today, I released another signal request for increasing the debt ceiling on USDC vault. We're again seeing some increased minting, potentially, of course, because the DAI price is trending higher. Although we've seen a lot of mints today related just due to farming. Apparently, there are some strategies to mint DAI from USDC, and you can still achieve a bit better yield. I didn't see it as an urgent thing, because I thought, okay, let's test out USDT and Peg's demand. Ideally, we would want to diversify it from USDC to other stablecoins, but honestly, I'm not sure how interesting those vaults are for arbitragers at this point. Like, they were just launched, so I think it's still better to just increase, to be more cautious and increase USDC debt ceiling. And I think the current vote is winning for, I think, a 40 million increase or 60, I'm not sure. And if this passes, it will go straight into tomorrow's executive vote. So yeah, so we don't cause any damage here. So we increase it as soon as possible. And that's all from my side, I guess.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Awesome. All right. Yeah, I guess I'll go through governance at a glance quickly. It's a little bit short this week. Paradoxically, there's quite a lot going on, but to the point where I just have to summarize some of the things. But yeah, I guess active discussions. I think we're getting to a point where lots of the active discussions kind of come under MIPs or come under risk or come under signal requests. So there's kind of less kind of active discussions to point people to. One of the things I was going to highlight was SebVenture's MakerDAO in 5 years' time discussion, which he posted, I think, the week before last, just discussing, what MakerDAO would look like in 5 years and discussing the changes in the DeFi ecosystem and such. I'd also like to highlight, well, it's kind of been discussed too much, that I posted a post the other day talking about the Autonomous MakerDAO working group, which is a group of mainly community contributors and also Amy from the foundation, who are kind of working on kind of pushing the DAO more towards kind of the decentralized aim and kind of distributing risk teams and getting community contributors involved as much as possible, kind of as a kind of matter of priority. So that also is taking place. And if you have time to spare and want to help, by all means, leave a message on that. Or leave a response on that post, or get in touch with me or Amy or anyone. So in terms of seeking consensus, pretty much has actually covered the two main signal requests I wanted to highlight, which are his two, the USDCA debt ceiling increase, and changing the box and TTL auction parameters, both of which end tomorrow. And yeah, so there's I think there's 8 other signal requests currently active on the forum. So there's quite a lot of stuff going on. So yeah, if you have time to kind of read through stuff and vote, that'd be appreciated. But yeah. All right. So I think that's the end of governance at a glance. I'm starting to whether I should actually do a kind of a governance domain update as either in addition to or instead of governance at a glance. So I'll maybe kind of do a brief one now. I guess just talking about, so part of what kind of I'm focusing on, and I have some assistants now, so my assistants are mostly focusing on this while I do day-to-day things. But we're kind of trying to focus on fulfilling some of the responsibilities of the facilitator that are more sort of longer term and have been kind of left for the time being, mainly in the kind of area of kind of defining an emergency process MIP kind of more formally, and getting kind of sign off on that from governance. And then yeah, kind of quite a lot of tasks are kind of trying to tidy up the MIPS process a little bit, make it more streamlined and less awkward to use. And I think we're going to be working on potentially revamping the monthly cycles slightly to kind of coincide or shortly after the DS chief changes, which are coming at some point. I'm not quite sure when, but soon. So yeah, I think that's probably how things are in governance. MIPS. Charles, do you want to do your MIPS update?
Yeah. Share my screen. Okay, so this week was the first week of September's governance cycle. It officially began on Monday, and the formal submission period was from that Monday until yesterday at midnight. And this is when, just to reiterate, this is when MIPS and sub-proposals that have been in the RFC phase and have completed their feedback period are proposed by the author to request to enter the governance cycle. So today we're going to go over the submission review of the proposals that have been formally submitted. I'll get into which ones were submitted later in this presentation. But Long for Wisdom is going to go over them to see which ones meet the criteria and see if they're eligible to be put into inclusion pools on Monday, September 14th. So as I mentioned, the inclusion pools for the MIPs that were formally submitted and deemed all right to proceed are going to go live on September 14th and will run until Thursday, September 17th, right before the governance call begins. And then next Thursday, Long for Wisdom will do the review of the inclusion pool results to see which of the proposals are allowed to proceed through the rest of the governance cycle, more specifically the governance pool. In terms of what we have seen in collateral onboarding, the PAX USD and USDT, aka Tether, executive passed on September 5th and was executed on September 8th. So those are added to the Maker protocol now, and you can now generate DAI from them. Next month's or this month's planned collateral types are comp, link, and LRC, and I'll briefly show the proposals for those later. And then lastly, the collateral onboarding community greenlight pools for this month will go live on September 21st. I believe there are 9 of them. So if you do want to check out which ones are going to be up to vote on, check out the collateral status index for reference, which Long keeps up to date. If someone wants to link it and put it in the chat, that'd be great. So we have a lot of proposals that are currently in the RFC phase, and mainly wanted to, I've repeated a lot of these over the past couple of weeks, but the 2 ones I really wanted to emphasize were that came in this week were the MIP-13 Declaration of Intent and Commercial Points for off-chain asset-backed lender to onboard real-world assets as collateral for DAI. And also there was another one from Centrifuge to commence the onboarding of Centrifuge-based collateral as real-world assets. And lastly, we had MIP-23, which was proposed by Long for Wisdom, and it's a new structure for domain teams and the roles that are contained in those teams. So in short, this proposal provides a flexible and consistent structural framework for personnel working for the DAO within any domain and any future domain. So I highly recommend to check that one out. Long, if you could link that in the chat as well. I'm sure a lot of people would be interested to provide feedback on that. So now for the proposals that have been formally submitted, we have, I think 10 that have been proposed. Maybe I'm counting wrong, but they fall under the categories of collateral onboarding, domain team onboarding and offboarding, and then another category, which is a declaration of intent and a more technical proposal. So as for the collateral onboarding, we have the applications for comp, link, and LRC that have all been submitted. The domain team onboarding and offboarding. We have the offboarding of Mariano as the smart contracts domain team, as well as the offboarding of Cyrus. And in terms of onboarding, we have the smart contract domain team, which contains 4 new people, as Will mentioned. It is Will, Lucas, Chris Mooney, and Brian. And then as for the new risk domain team proposal, it is for Primos. I do want to note with respect to the offboarding proposals, this also includes riches from last month that did not pass. I believe that this process should change to allow mandated actors to offboard themselves voluntarily and not need to go through governance, with the caveat that their offboarding would come with an open communication to the community, either through a forum post and or a sub-proposal like the ones that have been proposed. So this means that although these proposals have indeed been formally submitted, I do not recommend that they would go through governance, and that I'll have an action item to create an amendment MIP to make this note in both MIP 0 and MIP 7 to say that voluntary offboarding is not required to go through governance. So I just wanted to let everyone know that, and if anyone disagrees, feel free to voice your opinion once I finish. The last 2 proposals that have been formally submitted are the Darfix mechanism, which Will has spoken about extensively over the past couple months, and Sam M's declaration of intent for the DAI Flashmint module, which if we do have time, he can go ahead and speak about it again.
Do you want me to do that now or after?
I'm just about to finish this, so maybe right after, if that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. So lastly, I just wanted to remind everyone that there are some pre-MIP discussions that are still actively happening, mainly for the debt ceiling instant access module for debt ceiling adjustments, a governance chief contract redesign, which would then tie into a future vote delegation solution. So that's an important one to talk about. Of course, the liquidation system 2.0 redesign, and lastly, the discussion for adding a pool to prioritize the collateral applications that go through community green lights. So that's it for today. Sam, if you want to mention something about your proposal, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So the Flashmint module is a module that I'm thinking governance wants to request, you know, the smart contracts team or whoever build this module and add it to the Maker protocol. So basically what it does is it allows anybody to mint any amount of Flash, or sorry, any amount of DAI, and use that DAI for what any sort of arbitrage opportunities they can they want to, and as long as they return the DAI with the fee, they can keep any of the excess. So it's similar to all the other Flash loan type things. So the benefits of adding this, in my view, are it improves market efficiencies for DAI. You have democratization of arbitrage. Anyone can participate with this. For security, exploits requiring a large amount of capital will be found quicker, which makes the DeFi space safer overall. And fees provide an added income source. And additionally, the proposal requires that there's a debt ceiling for this as well, just for whatever need. So yeah, I got a little bit of feedback. It's in the final phase now, if you want to read it over. And I've actually built out an initial implementation myself just to save time. It's a pretty simple module. Doesn't require any UI or anything. So yeah, it should be easy to add.
Hey, if I can jump in here. Hey, Sam, the smart contracts team, a few of us looked over the implementation this morning. It looks good. There's a few issues. Expect a PR coming with kind of some tips and then some comments, but we'll keep working with you on it to get it like production ready. But yeah, it's getting there.
Cool, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah,
so I know.
if I can jump in here.
Okay, go ahead.
If anybody has any comments on why they didn't vote for the declaration of intent for forward guidance, which was part of the August governance cycle, you can message me on forums, and we can hopefully fix the proposal in whatever way it needs to be fixed to allow for it to be approved in some future governance cycle.
Thanks, Akiva. I feel like there are a couple of other people who asked for a little bit of time to talk about the MIPs. So if people can keep it quick.
Yeah, just a quick plug-in for the real-world asset stuff. We can chat about at the end of the call or in the next coming up week's collateral call to go into any points or questions the community has about onboarding credit tenant leases as collateral for DAI.
Great, thanks, Matt. That's actually a good point. I should give Juan a chance to kind of talk about the collateral call because I'd forgotten earlier.
Cool. So yeah, just 30 seconds. Yesterday we had a collateral call, collateral onboarding call with the trust tokens and 1inch with the Munis project. So Rafael and Sergey were there. Next week we're going to have Lucas from Centrifuge and Matthew, as he just commented, from 6S Capital, talking about real world assets. And so that's September 16th. The agenda is already in the forums. And yeah, the week after, we're going to have Stani from Aave and Tyler Winklevoss from Gemini talking about their respective projects. So yeah, join us.
All right, thank you for that, Juan. Sorry for forgetting you earlier again. All right.
Long, do you want me to jump in now, or were you planning on doing just in general a bit of a collateral onboarding discussion?
If you want to jump in about your MIP now, that's pretty fine. We'll push the discussion stuff a little bit to a little bit later, I think.
Yeah, so maybe just sort of quick outline on this MIP 13C3SP5, or in English, a declaration of intent to for Maker to start onboarding Centrifuge assets. The backstory of that is basically that in the last couple of months since, well, I basically already before Maker or multi-collateral DAI has been live, it's sort of been, of course, a goal and something that we've been developing towards to make it possible for sort of our real-world assets to be used as collateral in Maker. We've since had 4 MIP6 proposals that have all been greenlit by the community. 2 of them in the first MIP community greenlight poll in end of May, and sort of have continuously been working with different community members on addressing topics like liquidation, debt ceiling, stability fee, how we build our contracts, how they sort of can interact, and are now at a point where we believe it's sort of a feasible to start thinking about how to properly onboard them. The declaration of intent basically outlines a few guidelines for us to follow as we sort of develop this process, with the idea that a MIP proposal can come out of that can be used for onboarding Centrifuge-based assets, which function slightly differently from your average ERC20 token that is a collateral type in MCD right now. And so, this is the predecessor to a MIP that will then be an executive vote for some of these first assets, that we're trying to see how much we will work together with the existing domain teams, of course, as much as we can, but also Centrifuge is just happy to step in and help do part of that work where possible.
Great, thanks. Okay, yeah, hopefully we'll get a chance to discuss that in more detail later. For now, I'll just blitz through the MIP submission review. As Charles said, there were, I think, 9 MIPs or proposals that were submitted for September. All of them are fine, with the exception that I agree with Charles that the offboarding proposals for voluntary, for domain teams voluntarily offboarding themselves is kind of a waste of time, and we just shouldn't really do it. And there's no reason to vote on it. It's kind of just, it's a reflection of reality that they're no longer working for Maker. So, so I'm happy for, as Charles said, to kind of deal with that outside of the governance cycle. And just remove them from the MIPS lists themselves, like manually. Everything else that's submitted, though, will move forward to inclusion polls on Monday. All right. Okay, let's, I guess, get the discussions going. I think we'll probably start with Vishesh and then go into the Peg. Vishesh, if you can kind of try and keep it as quick as you can, that'd be good. And then we'll get into discussion.
All right. So
let me just give you permissions.
Share my screen.
There you go.
All right. So just in terms of where we're at for the Peg, so around first we saw sort of the Peg trending downward a bit, with ETH price initially coming up and then coming down a little. You know, part of this was there was a tremendous amount of increased liquidity on the market at the time, which I'll touch on a little bit later. And then basically, as the ETH price continued to fall, and as we saw quite a few positions on different platforms either liquidate or unwind, you basically saw you know, a drying up of the liquidity in that moment. But you also saw, as certain positions were unwound, more DAI made its way onto the open market. Plus, there was the deal with Uniswap. So, what we'll go into here is basically a huge chunk of the trades that were occurring in the last week for DAI were on Uniswap, except for while quite a few positions were being unwound. During that time, there was also a fair amount on Oasis. So let's kind of dive into that. So you can see sort of here, just proportionately, how much of that trading volume was from Uniswap, which typically I think we see Oasis and DYDX tend to dominate a larger chunk of this trading volume. So to go into the DAI USDC pair, so obviously chunk of this is curve, and then basically what we saw in the last few days was this price running up a fair amount to around $1.02, $1.03, which we'll touch on as well. DAI USD kind of echoes a similar story, but with, as usual, a fair amount of variability in price. With USDT is basically very similar to USDC. So where we're at overall is 430 or so million DAI total. Only 340 million or so from ETH, 3.4 from BAT, about 40 million from USDCA, about 47 million from WBTC, and then smaller amounts from the other collateral types. So just to touch on, so the ETH-A DAI supply, actually I'll do that one last. So USDC-A, what we basically saw was very low utilization for the better part of the month, and then basically in the last few days, this shot back up to about 40 million. And then WBTC was holding steady around 80 million, and then basically over the last few days was reduced to 60 and then about 47. So this was some of these positions were cleared out. ETH. So basically the last time we spoke, we saw this sort of trend starting to run up for the ETH-A DAI supply. And then immediately thereafter, we saw this sort of start to come down and clear out. So to kind of touch on what was going on here, basically a few things happened in this time frame. Obviously, the ETH price came down, and so there were some liquidations, but very small amount compared to this sort of 80 or so million DAI that was cleared out over the course of 3 days. So a vast majority of that was not due to liquidations. There were a lot of positions that were refinanced or unwound, and I think by and large it was repayments of DAI that brought that supply back down. So just to touch on where some of that DAI is right now, I mean, so there's 17 million in one of the YETH vault pool. There's about 32 million DAI in the curve deposits, and then compound, what we saw basically was we're down to about 140 million excess supply on compound. So, and then we can see some of the large holders, about 70 million in the Sushi Swap liquidity pool, about 37 million in the Uniswap pool, 13.6 million in Balancer, 13.1 in Curve, and then you have smaller amounts in a few other known smart contracts. So basically, the thread here is kind of over that time frame, we had a large quantity of movement of DAI, out of the Uniswap liquidity pool into the SushiSwap liquidity pool, we saw a fair amount of repayments on platforms that were undergoing farming, or like Compound, where people were supplying large quantities of excess supply. So we saw those supplies come down a bit, presumably due to repayments. So you can see an example here. This is one of those large vaults with the YETH positions. I believe this is the one. And what we saw was like around the fourth, there was a series of repayments of 2.5 million DAI each, where basically this was unwound to a much safer collateralization ratio. And we'd all seen previously where they'd halted deposits, so or halted mintings, and so basically after that was paused, it also was wound down. So this contributes to the reduction in the DAI supply minted for ETH. And then we basically already touched on who a few of these large vault owners are. So all in all, this kind of resulted in some of that liquidity for DAI, a fair amount of trading volume and some volatility there, but then ultimately that liquidity for DAI drying up. And what you'll see actually is a lot of these movements kind of counteracted a bit the price impact. And then when we saw on something like the USDC pair, there wasn't quite that same counteracting phenomenon. And so these pairs kind of jumped up in price a bit more easily. But that was, at the end of the day, same thing due to some of that liquidity drying up and that reduction in supply out there. Okay, so I think that was a fair amount, but I'm happy to double click on anything in particular that people would like to touch on. And I don't see any questions in the chat there.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I think Kirash mentioned something earlier. Maybe he wants to chime in with that now.
Yeah, I was wondering if the movement of WBC out of Maker is due to the stability fee, but it seems like people have done the chain analysis and it seems to be farming driven. But if anyone wants to expand on that, I would appreciate it.
I mean, I would say, given the values of the stability fees currently, it's far more likely for like native asset price and also for farming yields to be driving right. So liquidations as well. So liquidations, repayments, general unwinding due to price volatility, and then decreased opportunities for farming yield all contribute, I think, much more so to the movement of both DAI supplies minted and collateral amounts locked than stability fees are likely to. Because I think, by and large, people are more concerned with, liquidation events and or the ability to lose access to, very, very large yields. And I think that's driving the decision-making process of where people move their money much more so than, hey, I'm, paying, say, 2% more per year for holding these positions.
Yeah, so I think Marco made an analysis and he found on the recent unwinding on Red Bitcoin. Those vaults actually migrated Red Bitcoin to Aave, and they borrowed USDC and they farmed it, I think, on Sushi. But then again, when you were asking about stability, if it had an impact, I think not, because borrowing USDC on Aave costs you now 4%. So definitely it's related to pursuing farming yields instead of the increased stability fee having some effect, I think.
Thanks for that. Any other questions anyone wants to, or discussions anyone wants to start with regards to the Peg? Okay, seems like people are good for that topic. Did Greg asking to bring on the poll for the box? Yes, we did, Greg. Yeah, to reiterate, there is a signal poll in the forum for changing the box parameter. Cool. Primož, do you want to kind of discuss some of your ETH-B thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So there was a poll about a month ago. People voted in favor of adding support of adding lower liquidation ratio for ETH, which would be ETH-B vault. And I think intention was, to finally start charging fees, but also to increase DAI supply through either new vaults opening up or just simply, attracting existing users to mint more DAI due to lower collateralization requirements. The risk premium and the ceiling wasn't really voted on, and also the liquidation ratio wasn't. And I think the final vote was let the risk team decide. So that's why I want to bring up this discussion today, because there are few things to address. So if we include lower liquidation ratio ETH-B vault, of course, we may be able to charge more money, but just want to be clear that this doesn't necessarily mean, in terms of risk reward for Maker, we're making things better. Potentially, we're increasing more risk because of lower collateralization, which I'm going to explain why. Of course, we are helping the Peg with this, which I think is a really positive thing, right? We, worst case, we would see zero minting, but best case, we would help to bring DAI supply up. But the challenge we're currently facing is that we need to have some kind of consensus in the community about the whole risk appetite for ETH-B and what's the longer term strategy. And that's simply because what I think might happen here is that all those ETH vaults who are currently farming DAI, and we know that half of ETH vault exposure is basically using DAI to farm it. They'll be very interested to move to ETH-B, right? And that's simply because if you lower liquidation ratio to 130, they'll be able to mint more DAI, and this actually, if you make some calculations, this boosts their yields by 15% and more. So they'll be very keen to do it. And then when it comes to risks, right, especially when you try to assess, what's the proper debt ceiling, there are a few things. So the first one, obvious one, is of course lower collateralization ratio. We have a higher probability of losses when it comes to liquidations. Not necessarily we have a higher probability of liquidations, but the additional risk that's there with low liquidation ratios that we don't usually talk about a lot is the OSM risks, right? Oracle security model risks, where if you have a case where Ether drops heavily in 1 hour time span, some people could exploit this. For instance, if Ether drops for 20%, people could just easily basically dump Ether on Maker on the lowest liquidation ratio using the alt OSM price. And they would mint, as much as DAI as they could, because they're basically making an instant profit. And you could have a bad debt. Actually, you would have a bad debt created instantly, and Maker would just need to carry this. So what's really important, and what I want to highlight at all of this, is that whatever debt ceiling we choose, we need to be sure that we are constantly utilizing it as much as possible, so we minimize OSM risks. From our side, definitely some proposed strategy would be to start with lower debt ceilings and then carefully increase them in the meantime. And as I said, we would need to make sure that it's utilized as much as possible. And then another angle which I want to highlight is that the risk premium we can calculate like we did for the ETH. It's really hard to assess those OSM risks, so the calculation itself will be again a bit biased. But then again, I was thinking that even if we come, with a lower number, that might not really, properly assess OSM risk, the governance should actually consider charging higher fees. And why is that? I think that's at some, we could basically test the sensitivity of minting of vaults on higher rates, right? This would be, I think, ideal test case when we see, okay, how rate sensitive are really, those users, those vaults, particularly those who are farming, if we, enable them lower liquidation ratio, but we might, charge them 5% or more, right? I think this is gonna, give us a good estimate of, how rate sensitive our users are, and for going forward, it should be, it should be a really good feedback. So yeah, finally, going forward, we intend to address all of this in a post. We'll also make some analysis. I've run some numbers already on risk premium, but yeah, I just wanted to mention this today. What does it mean going forward? We need a strategy in place because ETH-B vault might be really, really heavily utilized. There might be a huge demand simply because, just making calculation as a yield farmer, you would be probably using it, right? So that's all I have to say at the moment. Is there any question?
There are a couple in the sidebar.
Yeah, just following up on that, and I just put it in the chat area. I mean, is it possible, and I don't know how the code is set up, where if somebody issues DAI within the previous hour, that we could have the liquidation fee be some exorbitant number to offset that OSM risk?
I think definitely not something I can answer, maybe the smart contract guys.
I think it would be complex to do that. I think, you could say it's feasible, but I think it would be quite difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it would involve changing some core contracts, which is not impossible, but we're also working on liquidations 2.0. So maybe it's something we can consider for that update. But it's gonna open up we're gonna have a different pattern essentially in a few months.
No, understood. Just thinking outside the box as a mechanism to defend against it. If you made the liquidation fee, for example, I don't know, 95%, if somebody took out a loan right before it liquidated and it was clear that the intent was to exploit the system, then it would be a severe penalty.
Yeah, but the OSM doesn't, I mean, this exploit doesn't really, the idea behind the OSM attack or exploit is that you really don't care about collateral anymore. You just mint DAI and you instantly make profit, basically. Perhaps, I didn't explain it really in detail, but I think that solution wouldn't really work. As much
I thought if I understood it correctly, and just without taking too much time, if you put up, doesn't matter, 100 ETH, the logic would be that you'd get liquidated and you'd lose at least 13% as a penalty. Even if the price materially dropped during that 1 hour period of time, you're still expecting to receive some collateral back. Right? You're not expecting the price to go to zero where you get none of it back.
Well, the price doesn't have to go to zero for you to get none of it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this
okay,
is,
no,
this
me
is
not understanding. It's fine.
Yeah. Basically, it would be like you lock up 100 ETH, right? And because of the collateralization ratio, right, you can get a significant amount of DAI against that 100 ETH. And it's basically exploiting the fact that the price the system uses is the current price of the OSM. And the queued price of the OSM, right, could be, ETH experienced a 20% drop. So the 100 ETH, in the real world is worth 20% less, but the system is using this price that's, thinks it's 20% more. And so depending on how low the collateralization ratio is, you could actually borrow more DAI than your ETH is worth. That's the exploit. So the exploiter is not expecting to get any of their collateral back.
Understood. Okay.
So I wonder too how difficult. I mean, maybe Will and Brian and the rest of the smart contracts team can chime in, but how difficult it would be to limit frauds on the ilk for ETH-B to the minimum of the queued and current OSM price. So you don't trigger liquidations, right? But you don't let people take on more risk when they shouldn't be.
I mean, now you're talking about replacing the VAT.
Okay,
Just
never
redeploying
mind.
the whole system.
I was hoping it would just be an adapter or something. Never mind. That sounds.
I mean, one defense we do have against this sort of situation, at least with 1.2 in place, is we have the upper limit on the sort of amount of DAI required to cover outstanding auctions. So there's sort of a ceiling on how much, right, can be liquidated at once. And so if already like, you know, like what's the limit right now, 30 million or 15 million, let's say it's 30 million. Somebody opens a 50 million vault or something. Well, you know, at worst, only 30 million of that actually goes through to liquidation after the OSM tick. You know, they still get away with, I guess they still get all the DAI, so maybe it doesn't actually do much, but it at least limits how damaging it is to the system.
I think we may need to move on now, guys, but that was interesting. Cool. All right. So our last discussion point is kind of talking about Centrifuge a little bit, real-world assets a little bit, and how the domain teams kind of prioritize collateral. So I guess open to anyone who wants to start that off.
Sure, this is Matt, I guess Success Capital, and we're put together a declaration of intent to bring on these real world assets. And Long, tell me how much time I've got on this because I don't want to take up too much. If it's like a 3-minute window, that's fine.
We got like 15 minutes for discussion, but it is supposed to be a discussion, so don't take too much time, I guess.
Fair enough. Yeah, so in general, what we're putting together is what is a scalable, legally compliant mechanism to bring on in the initial case of credit tenant commercial leases, where we know the credit that's ultimately behind it. And the structure behind it is using the same mechanisms that are used today with putting together statutory trusts. And
sorry, Matt, could I interrupt you there? Sorry.
Sure.
I think the focus of the discussion is more supposed to be around, I guess, what the domain teams kind of are prioritizing, and I guess why real-world assets have not been already implemented, I guess, if that makes sense, rather than kind of the specific details of the proposed assets. So I think Planet X, I guess, prompted this discussion. Is he still here? Yeah, Planet, do you want to kind of?
Yeah, yes, I'm still here. If you can hear me all right. I've been noticing that we're greenlighting the collateral after collateral type, but the actual implementation is lagging. And today, Lucas or Spin were wondering where's the approval, where's the domain work for my collateral. So I was thinking about asking what is holding up the process on the domain side.
There's no hold up.
Let me talk to this. So I mean, look, there's you have 3 domain teams right now, and almost all of them are employees of the foundation. And our jobs is not only collateral onboarding, right? We have a bunch of other work that we are responsible for as well, right? Like I can tell you from my side, right? I have, you know, the entire Oracle infrastructure, right? That we need to constantly be developing, improving, right? There is, you know, management for my team, right? And collateral onboarding, you know, and governance in particular takes up a significant amount of my time, but definitely not all of it. And the same goes for people like Will, right? Where him and the rest of the smart contracts team, right? They work every month on collateral onboarding, right? But they're also working on liquidations 2.0. They're also working on just like core contract upgrades. So, you know, the throughput here is, it's really limited by the fact that, you know, if you want more throughput with collateral onboarding, you should onboard more domain teams. It's as simple as that. Or more, I should say more if you check the why earn, I think fast tracking thread, someone had said that, you know, seems kind of funky the way the domain teams right now are onboarding collateral types, given right that the community has green lighted so many. And I talked a little bit about our kind of methodology that I, on behalf of the Oracle team and the rest of the domain teams, kind of go through when when kind of figuring out what work do we want to do next, right? Which collateral types that the community has approved do we want to work on? I think before that post, there was a little bit lack of transparency, and I can understand why. And so I think that post was very important. But basically what I said was that, like, the factors that we take into account are, okay, well, how much DAI can be generated, you know, if we were to add this collateral type? You know, how much work would it be to onboard this collateral type, right? You know, for example, so security tokens, right?
All that you're making clear right now, Nick, is that you're like you're just kind of like, the point is like, why isn't this getting done sooner? And your answer is like, well, I work for the foundation, and the foundation has like all this MKR, and it's just like, you have people who are coming to the project trying to kind of essentially get paid by the protocol.
Chris, tone it down a bit, please.
Chris, can you please let me finish? So when we do the work,
continue the monologue, please.
Chris, please. So the thing is that, given our limited throughput, right, we have to choose, you know, what is the maximum amount of tokens that we can onboard that will generate the maximum amount of DAI supply, given the amount of resources that we have, right? And so this is why, for example, with security tokens, right, I've seen that the community has greenlit a ton of security tokens, right? I've seen the community has greenlit a ton of LP tokens, but compared to vanilla tokens, the work required to onboard security tokens and the work required to onboard LP tokens is significantly higher for a DAI supply kind of payoff that is unclear. So I don't think it's some big conspiracy when, you know, my team comes back and says, like, you know what, I think the best low-hanging fruit right now is to onboard, you know, something like Chainlink or something like Compound, right? Because they're very high market cap tokens that handle, you know, very similar to tokens that we've already onboarded. We know the security implications of them, and we know that we can get multiple of these done a month. Versus if you wanted us to onboard the security token, right, you may not be able to onboard any tokens for maybe 3 months, right? So these are all trade-offs that we have to make.
So can I ask, like, KNX, Mana, and like the other ERC20 tokens, all several $100 million market cap ERC20 tokens, have generated to date around 500,000 DAI in debt. So, like, of course we can add 100 more and then we're at 50 million DAI. But that's also going to take 3 months, right? Whereas, like, sort of the proposals we're also discussing with real world assets, those are borrowers that are actually coming to MakerDAO saying we want this and we want to generate DAI, and actually are not just adding new DAI, like more DAI, but actually adding diversified uncorrelated DAI that has various other advantages for the system. So I think that so this is like saying, oh, it's easiest right now. Like, of course, if we just do the easiest things, we'll do like these tiny incremental steps, but how can we as a community move forward on this like big thing, big elephant in the room that is like adding something new, something different?
I mean, Lucas, I completely agree. And I hope that what people got out of from what I just said is not that we're not doing security tokens or we're not doing LP tokens. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's more just trying to gives some insight into why we're prioritizing certain things in the short term versus not. To your point, yeah, KNC, ZRX, Mana were kind of flops. But the reasoning behind adding those was that they were dead simple to add. There was very little work required on top of regular work required to add those. Versus other things get much more difficult. So like I said, I mean, it's not like if we were to go through all of the top kind of market cap kind of vanilla ERC20 tokens right now, I think by like end of November, we can have probably all of them done, right? And at that point, right, all the low hanging fruit is gone. And then we're probably looking at more long-term things, right? Like LP tokens, like security tokens, right? Towards the end of the year, things slow down anyway. So that may kind of be the perfect time to take on this development overhead penalty anyway.
So I think from this discussion, it sounds like the right way to frame this isn't so much asking why is there a pileup of greenlit collateral types that haven't been assessed by risk teams, because I think that's naturally as Charles pointed out in the chat just now, that's naturally what's going to happen with greenlight, because it's easier to greenlight something than it is to do the analysis, and we have a bottleneck in the labor that's available on the domain team side. But the right way to frame this question is, should we have a discussion about priorities and making sure that we're making the most efficient use of the domain team resources right now? Because, and I think, Nick, it's useful for you to provide this perspective, that I think it's probably in the near future always going to be the case that adding, the most popular to sort of medium mid-market ERC20 tokens is always going to look like the lowest hanging fruit, because we've done it before. It's mostly we just need to analyze the token for safety, and then we need to see if it has a liquid market, and then we can just keep adding those. But the risk there is that can actually continue to be the low-hanging fruit forever, because at this rate, as you can see, new tokens are being created all the time. There's new ERC20 tokens that are becoming kind of more mature, and we can basically be stuck in this for a while, right, where we're always taking the easiest step. Well, at some point, we do need to bite the bullet and actually, start taking a shot at the, potentially much more scalable, collateral types, the real-world assets that can really change things. And of course, there's a lot more to do there, but I think that probably the concerns that people are raising that have as much of this conversation is about priorities, and should we start to take a look at those things more seriously, especially just given how when we needed emergency action to fix the DIPEG, clearly that kind of invigorated a lot of activity around adding new collateral types, right? Some of which was very effective. So there was new things added, like WBTC, which turned out to be a huge success. USDC, which also ended up helping the peg a lot and is still used as an important tool. Can we do a similar kind of initiative where basically we give things a big kind of kick in the ass and start really thinking about how to add real world assets, right? Not because we just need to do everything faster, but because maybe it's just time to reassess priorities. So maybe we can kind of frame the discussion from now on about priorities and when is it time to actually start looking at that.
I don't disagree with anything you said, Lev. Like it's all a balancing act of kind of short-term versus long-term kind of prioritization, right?
Can I just add an additional point on all the discussions happening there? So I think also another point of consideration when we start onboarding the real world assets is that of course we're gonna also have to adapt some of the practices that actually are happening right now. I mean, in terms of also like the risk framework that we're going to be using. I think for that, it's going to have also to have a little bit of time for adapting the methodologies and the way that we're gonna assess those assets, because of course they will have different types of not only risk premiums associated with them, but also sources of information that will be associated with some of those real world assets. You know, like you're talking more like about traditional banking ways of assessing assets. And because we haven't also up until this time actually made all of the time to develop those frameworks internally within the teams, that will require some time. So I just kind of think it would be like the community needs to know that there will be probably a little bit of the time and the effort that we'll have to develop on that, and kind of like the patience that comes along. So we have a few ideas of how to do that. And yeah, I'm happy actually to bring also like experience to the table, because working in banking for a long time. But you will require, yeah, particularly like talk about like data sources and things like this for assets that are relatively illiquid at this point. Will require tapping into all of those data sources actually to get the required information to properly assess the risks. So yeah, there will be a bit of patience in there.
Can I jump in here, Will? Because I'd like to, so maybe like a bit on what we've been doing and sort of what I've been getting more active with these two MIP proposals that we proposed in the current cycle. Centrifuge has been working with the Maker community, with the domain teams. We've been doing this since before multi-collateral DAI was live, are extremely familiar with the code base, and have been sort of doing everything on our end we can do to make this as easy as possible. And sort of the proposal I'm making to the community, and I hope that sort of will get support, is that actually instead of sort of looking at this giant issue and just sort of being paralyzed by it, I'm suggesting that as a community, we move forward with onboarding these assets at a small scale with a reduced complexity, reduced expectations, the same way that single collateral DAI was launched with a small debt ceiling and one asset. And we spent years now trying to manage ETH and crypto assets as a collateral type. We should start onboarding these assets to get first experience. There's of course a loss of a few 100,000 or even a few million in debt ceiling, because some of these we might make some mistakes in the Maker community is something we should avoid. But sort of there's a tremendous amount of stuff that we can learn by going these first steps. And so the commitment that I'm making on behalf of Centrifuge and like sort of a lot of our asset originators is this this availability to do this work together, to come up with proposals, to do so at a scale that is safe, and to build out this process together. And so this, I think, is sort of the core of the MIP 13 Declaration of Intent that I've sort of drafted, and that I'm really curious to hear your feedback and would love to further solidify with everyone.
Yeah, sounds good. As Primož was covering earlier, my approach towards onboarding is maybe a little bit unorthodox from everything else that's been happening, but I think the most important thing is actually capturing data as early as possible, so that we can actually work with real life data rather than or complementary to theoretical forecasting multi-color models, so that we can kind of measure expectations against actuals. So I think, yeah, it would be good to start conservatively and increasing by steps as we get in the data and actually refreshing our models, basically. From a risk perspective, of course, not talking about the oracles and smart contracts piece.
But I think like the one thing I want to sort of keep reiterating, I think that is important in this discussion is, and it is something I mentioned earlier, but we talk to credit people in the traditional financial world, and like sort of onboarding these real world assets will open the floodgate to potentials of collateral that are several times the size of our current DAI supply. Really, like sort of, if we figure out this process, if we figure out how to do this safely, then we will not have an issue with DAI supply, and we will have plenty of borrowers interested to borrow DAI, willing to pay a stability fee, generating a ton of revenue for Maker, and sort of allowing us to bring back the DSR, sort of normalizing the system that today is like basically Maker is a free ATM, right, where you put in ETH and you get DAI. And the second point is it is the diversity of the collateral, right? Like the peg is broken at the moment, and these yield farming plays are definitely like extremely chaotic and hard to manage, and take a lot of attention from sort of this ongoing governance work. And so adding this baseline of just stable supply of DAI will drastically change how the DAI market will look like, because not 100% of the collateral backing it is actually going to be sort of dependent on the lust of DeFi users to speculate or sort of play along in this game.
Yes, but is this a feasible solution? Would it be possible to fast track the centrifuge collateral with a very low debt ceiling, and then see how it plays out? Is that even feasible?
I mean, it's feasible in the sense where if the community told us tomorrow, don't onboard any more collateral for 2-3 months, then we could probably find a safe, secure way to onboard some centrifuge security tokens. But, you know, with the understanding that we won't be able to onboard anything else for months. So if that's what the community wants, we can probably do that.
I mean, from risk perspective, and I've read Centrifuge's proposal, it seems that, you know, they have some, you know, there's a team token in place which actually protects Maker. They think he proposed 4 million debt ceiling per collateral, sort of, you know, propose some kind of conservative parameters. I think we could, you know, fast track it, make a, you know, a risk assessment that would speed up the whole process. We could even use probably the general model for crypto assets. Could actually be used here. And if you have infrastructure at play, such as monitoring the current exposure and particularly liquidation infrastructure, if it works fine, I don't see any reasons why we couldn't fast track it. But there's one kind of risk that, you know, our risk team wasn't really wasn't really focusing a lot, because, you know, when you were adding either or something, it's not as important. But legal risk is something that's of high importance here. And you know, we have 3 domain teams now. I'm not sure was it ever discussed who is going to cover the legal risk here, because in terms of risk, that's probably the highest risk if you go with, you know, even low debt ceiling, and, you know, even if technical implementation is in place. I still haven't got that answer.
Yeah, I think I can cover a little bit about that. I had a discussion when like our initial proposal to kind of work with the foundation was submitted, so I had a little bit of insight into that. So at the moment, it's actually, I think the foundation has got like its own legal team. We're still not 100% sure, but I think there's an intention for some of that to potentially be done, that some of the KYC AML piece to be done in that space. Actually the feedback that was given, it was that the risk team initially would kind of like assume that some of that work would be potentially done by legal work, but the legal team. But I'm not 100% sure at the moment. And I think usually in the traditional financial world, you would have actually, credit operational risk teams actually looking after some of those risks, which is kind of significantly different to the quantitative risk and modelers that actually doing the work. They're usually not kind of combined together for logical reasons, I guess. Yeah.
So we've been working a lot on that topic, and while we definitely don't have the size of the team that the other to sort of staff a full-time legal team to address a lot of these questions, we have been working with reputable lawyers to work out exactly how we're proposing to do this. I've sort of outline how we actually are able to do liquidations in a way that we never actually have a sale of securities within Maker, and that greatly simplifies the problem. We will share more information on that in the forums. This is still something we're working out, and maybe to address what Nick was saying before, that it would require 3 months of nonstop work by the foundation to do the technical work. I would say that having personally worked with the multi-collateral DAI code base and done some of the analysis of the changes that we would need, they are very minimal and they are something that we are comfortable doing ourselves, proposing ourselves and sort of going through an audit, cooperating with the smart contracts team, making that a minimum impact on them. And so my hope is actually that we're not talking about putting a hold on smart contract domain work and Oracle domain work for a full quarter before these assets can move forward. And so I think I would, yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, no, I echo that completely. I think the community needs to weigh the maximum impact of bringing DAI onto the market with knowing that the parties that are trying to bring on real world assets have spent and are currently expending a lot of money preparing that process. They're not doing that so that they can theoretically, it's not build it and hope. We're doing this so explicitly we'll be able to borrow the DAI, and hopefully the community can keep up with the debt ceiling requests as we ask for them.
All right, guys.
So there's currently four MIPs, I believe, that have come out recently that are laying the groundwork for onboarding real world assets. But in light of this discussion just now about priorities, do you think that it makes sense to have some kind of signal request poll or something that discusses the priorities for these onboardings on the governance level? I, for one, would appreciate a venue to express my opinion that it makes sense to prioritize this stuff. Kind of, that would be in the best interest of the protocol.
Anyone is able to make signal requests? Yeah, I think that would be a reasonable use of the signal request process. All right, I'm going to stop us there, though, I think, because we are approaching 30:30. Amy did say one thing in the chat that I was hoping she would say on the comms as well, because I thought it was important.
Yeah, so if it wasn't clear, I mean, one thing that Long for Wisdom and I have talked about quite a few times as well is that we are just lacking the staff that's needed to work on this just from a community standpoint. So there are grants available to, if someone's interested in putting together the prioritization or the assessments, anything like that, BFITS and Piper has been awesome at helping. So we have the grants for that, and please do reach out, because we've been looking across the community.
All right, thanks. All right, I feel like that's a good place to end. So yeah, I guess I look forward to seeing the discussion continue on the forums, potentially seeing some of those signal requests. And yeah, I guess we will let everyone get back to their lives. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming, and I'll talk to you all next week, I'm sure.
Thank you. Bye.